Hi, folks. I'm going to talk to you today about these valuable intellectual traits that I think are important for you to develop before we really get to talking about good writing style and good research techniques. I just want people to be in the right mindset to be a scholar. In my opinion, being an intellectual doesn't really come down to your IQ or how many books you have read. It's about a mentality and a way that you approach knowledge and the quest to learn and understand. And so these aren't most of the ideas in this presentation do come from the Foundation for Critical Thinking. You will inevitably get a little bit of my own philosophy in here too. Let's go ahead and begin. First thing I want to talk about is intellectual humility. Intellectual humility, in a nutshell, means that you don't let your ego get in the way of learning. So you've got to be aware of your own limitations. You've got to be aware of what you do not know, and that can sometimes clash with our ego because sometimes our egos make us want to kind of play the role of the smartest person in the room. I don't want to be shown up by somebody having more knowledge than I am, so I'm going to pretend like I'm very knowledgeable about a subject that I really am not. And sometimes, yeah, sometimes it can be tough for people's egos to say, like, hey, my information may not be that complete. It may be outdated. Maybe I should listen to you, this other person, instead. For some people, that's a real struggle. I personally, when I was younger, sometimes had a problem with intellectual humility. If you have ever been in an argument where you realized that you were wrong, but kept on arguing anyway because you didn't want to lose the argument, then this is something that you should be thinking about, right? Because that's, in that case, your need to win the argument became more important than a real journey to understand whatever you were arguing about. um, and that is not where you want to be. You don't want it to be more important to always insist that your ideas are right than to sometimes abandon your ideas in favor of the ideas that actually are right. But to do that, you have to acknowledge that you're wrong sometimes. As a college student, you will often have to acknowledge that you've got a professor who understands the subject better than you do, which, believe it or not, is sometimes even tough for college students. So yeah, I got a picture of Socrates here, and I do actually have a picture of some famous person that I associate with each of these virtues, and I don't think I'm going to really explain why right now. But if you want to look into any of these people, just do some brief and informal research. That can be something that you talk about on your discussion board post. If you'd rather talk about why Socrates, why Frederick Douglass, why did I choose these people, that can be your response to this presentation. Moving on. We've got intellectual courage. So intellectual courage just means that you are willing to speak your mind uh, without regard for whether you're going to get a bad reaction from other people. I think there's a lot of instances where it's tempting to not speak out or not rock the boat. You don't want to have the minority opinion. You don't have an opinion that's unpopular. Sometimes, this could be being a member of a social group, and the social group clearly has some ideas they agree on. It can be challenging to disagree with a social group. As far as a conformity and peer pressure angle goes. I myself, sometimes I just see this like I was just on social media sometime and just looking at some comments people are making, and I'm a liberal. My friends are liberals, and somebody had once posted a comment, a friend of a friend. They were criticizing Donald Trump, which I did a lot of that. And people were criticizing Trump, and somebody wrote, "Yeah, Donald Trump is a straight up Nazi." And I kind of wanted to say, I don't really think Donald Trump is actually a Nazi. I think that Nazis are, although he was a bad president, the Nazis were a lot worse. And I actually didn't say anything because I just felt like somebody was going to think I was defending Donald Trump, and then I was going to have to get in this, whole thing about not, that any any disagreement over the badness of Donald Trump would be like an endorsement of of Donald Trump. So I decided to keep my mouth shut. And sure, what the hell, they could say he's a Nazi, and that didn't really matter because it was just on social media. But that was one instance where I think it would have been like I didn't want the conflict, so I just didn't say that I thought that person was wrong. And that's not a great example of intellectual courage. I hope this whole presentation isn't just about the ways that I fail to live up to these to these traits. We're going to see how it goes. Moving on. Yeah, this is one of my favorite ones. Intellectual curiosity. So when you're a student, sometimes it's hard to think about, learning recreationally, learning for the joy of learning. And the reason it's hard is because, when you're a student, there's always somebody standing behind you with a grade book saying, you better read this book by Tuesday, and or else, there's going to be a quiz and you're going to get an F. And it's hard to really enjoy learning sometimes when the pressure of education and deadlines and grades and things are looming on you. But intellectual curiosity means that you want to learn things for the sake of learning things. So, wanting to read up on a historical event because you've got a history test coming and you don't want to get a bad grade on it, that's not really intellectual curiosity, but just, hearing something interesting about history, like what happened to Alexander the Great's body, and then deciding for yourself that that's interesting enough that hey, there's no grade, there's no promotion, there's no certification at stake. I just want to know about this, and going off into your own self-styled research project. That's intellectual curiosity. If you are interested in watching documentaries, nature documentaries, History Channel stuff. If you like to read nonfiction books for recreational purposes, even when there's no grade associated, then you may have this trait, this intellectual curiosity. Uh, I You don't want to abandon your intellectual curiosity, because if you give into the idea that like, oh yeah, learning is what you do when there's a test coming up, and then learning is always sort of like it's extrinsically motivated, meaning that you're always doing it for somebody else, because the teacher wants you to learn, for example. And then the problem with that is that once you get to a place where there's no longer a teacher, waving a grade book over your head and making you learn, if you're in the habit of learning is what I do when I'm threatened with a bad grade, then you don't have motivation to learn independently anymore. And so, I would say try to cultivate intellectual curiosity. Ask yourself about important questions and try to answer them. When I give you a research task, or when you do a research task for this class or any class, um, I say this might sound dorky, but I would say, make it interesting to yourself by saying, okay, it looks like I've got this project coming up. I've got to learn all about the invasive lionfish or is it dragonfish? Lionfish is lionfish, and the invasive lionfish in Florida. And I guess now I'm going to go on a quest to know everything that I need to know about this problem with the invasive lionfish in Florida. And and make it a quest and make it exciting for yourself. And if just your mentality is like, oh geez, now I got to do research, now I got to learn stuff. That's you could probably get through college like that, but that doesn't necessarily put you into this great intellectual critical thinking place that I want you to be in. When I use the word empathy, the first thing that usually comes to people's minds is a sort of a shared feeling. That is to say, if you think about somebody else suffering, you suffer a little too on their behalf emotionally. That's not really the point of intellectual empathy. Intellectual empathy is more like the ability to look at an issue from other people's perspective. So it's sort of an exercise in imagination. You might say, okay, so I know how I see this issue, but what if I were another person in another situation? Uh, uh, and It often helps to give a lot of clarity on what these issues are really about. It's actually very helpful in arguing, even arguing against the side that you're empathizing with, because you want to understand what their agenda really is. Sometimes just for the purpose of pointing out holes in it. But what often happens is that people are unwilling to look at any perspective other than their own, and they often end up mischaracterizing other people's positions. And one easy place to see this, in the United States, is our debate over abortion rights. And depending on where you stand on the issue, you may very well characterize the people on the other side as either their agenda is, baby killing, or else their agenda is, the systematic oppression of women. And I think those are people who are not interested in knowing what their opponents really believe on this issue. Another and totally non-political instance of intellectual empathy is I teach a class that has a lot of mythology in it, a literature class that has some mythology in it, and sometimes I'm teaching, myths. Which have, if you know your mythology, a lot of weird sex stuff, a lot of, sex with animals and incest and parts getting chopped off and this and that. And I've mentioned to my students that these are their religious texts. And sometimes my students' reaction, is to say, like, I can't believe this is the equivalent of the Bible, for ancient Egyptians, for ancient Greeks. This is what they believe. Why is their religion so pervy? I tell my students, well, the reason that you think of religion and sex as being sort of kind of incompatible is because, whether you're really a religious person or not, the Western world has really been shaped by, a religion. A handful of religions really that have some pretty strong sex taboos, but the ancient Greeks didn't have those, and the ancient Egyptians and a number of other people didn't have those taboos. And so when you look at their mythological and even religious texts, there are some very graphic discussions of sexual stuff that is surprising people who haven't been there. But if you can go on that journey of intellectual empathy and say, okay, but what if I were born into a society where nobody ever came up with the idea that sex has something to do with sin or shame or something like that? Then it's a lot easier to grasp, why their religious views on sex were so different from ours. So yeah, intellectual empathy. It is not about necessarily feeling for the other person, and it's not about always assuming the other person's points are valid or meeting them halfway. The reality is that if you want to understand a conflict, you have to understand the claims that are being made by both sides, and just being able to put yourself in the shoes of people, from different cultures in different times on different sides of a conflict is a really useful intellectual exercise to let you view a problem in its completeness. Next issue I want to talk about is intellectual integrity. Intellectual integrity means that you can't believe things only when it's convenient for you to believe them. So, for example, if you're familiar with the American Electoral College, you know that that's the system that by which we elect a president. It's not the popular vote. And if you're a fan of the Electoral College, when it awards a victory to your favorite candidate, but you say that the Electoral College is unfair when it awards the victory to the other opponent, that would be a lack of intellectual integrity. You can't just believe things when they are working in your favor. Or, on a more pragmatic level, if you tend not to come to a complete stop at stop signs, but you get mad when other drivers roll through a stop sign, then that would also be a lack of intellectual integrity. Intellectual autonomy means the ability to think for yourself. And this is something that's got to be taken in, sort of small doses. Like intellectual humility tells us that sometimes we need to listen to the experts because they know better than we do what we are talking about. I think you saw a lot of this during COVID-19. There's just all these people who thought they knew better than the doctors, better than the CDC, the epidemiologists. And I think that those folks lacked intellectual humility. It was tough for them to admit that they didn't really know what they were talking about. And they would have been better served, I think, by listening to the experts. However, you don't ever want to get into a situation where you completely surrender your thought process up to somebody else and you say, like, well, I'm just going to believe whatever they just believe. I'm just going to assume that whatever they are doing is right. That's what intellectual autonomy means, thinking for yourself. Sometimes you might, if you ever hear people talking about a cult of personality, that sometimes is an illustration of people who quit thinking for themselves and just um, decide that their politics, for example, is whatever Donald Trump says is politics. Maybe their ideas about health are whatever Gwyneth Paltrow or Dr. Phil or Dr. Oz tell them is healthy. That would be a lack of critical thinking, and would be a lack of intellectual autonomy. One time I went out with a girl, and I asked her what her politics were, and she said Hillary Clinton. And I tried to get her to say that was her answer. I tried to get her to be specific about, what exactly it was, but no, it was just Hillary. And I listen, I don't hate Hillary Clinton. I voted for Hillary Clinton, but I just think that when you think about politics, you can't just say whatever this person believes. I'm coming along for the ride. So anyway, no second date. Um, for various reasons. But anyway, yes. So here's a scary example of a lack of intellectual autonomy. Um, I mentioned earlier in this presentation that I'm more of a liberal, but I do I listen to all perspectives. And one of the things I used to do before he died was I used to listen to the Rush Limbaugh show on the radio. Rush Limbaugh is a famous conservative commentator, and he has a lot of bad ideas. So anyway, one day he was on the radio, and I think he said something like, blah, 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 climate change is a hoax that was invented by the Chinese government. And that's one of the things that he spread, one of those incorrect ideas that he spread on his radio show. And then he said, okay, well, let's go to the telephone lines and take a caller. A caller was on the line, and Rush Limbaugh said, hey, you're on the Rush Limbaugh show. What did you want to talk about today? And the caller said, yeah, Rush, I'm a really big fan of your show, and I just wanted to share this thought that I had. I think that global warming or climate change is a hoax, and that the whole thing was just dreamed up by the Chinese government. And Rush Limbaugh said to him, that's a very smart observation. You're a very smart guy. And that's like the scariest thing I've ever heard on the radio. Not because both of these guys are wrong about climate change, but because this schmuck who called up the Rush Limbaugh show and just repeated Rush Limbaugh's theory right back to him didn't seem to know where Rush Limbaugh's ideas ended and his own ideas began. And that's scary, you know? By all means, have people that you admire, have people that you look to as, experts, or just sensible people whose ideas influence yours. But you don't want to cede too much control of your thought process to any other person. It's never a person or organization, group, philosophy, political party. None of that stuff. It's never safe to say I have so much faith in this other person, organization, party, whatever, that I'm just going to turn off my critical thinking skills. I'm not going to even think for myself what's a good idea, what's a bad idea, what's right, what's wrong. I just believe whatever this person says. All right. So that's what intellectual autonomy means. And I hope that you have thought of examples from your life where these issues have come up, or ways that you could maybe work on becoming better. I hope you already have some of these traits, but I'm sure we could all work on becoming better at them. I certainly could. I'm not giving this presentation from a perspective of like, yeah, I've mastered this stuff. Now I have no ego, and I always, perfectly understand other people's point of view just as well as mine. I'm still working on this, folks, and I hope you'll join me on this journey. Okay, so I do have just a short and fairly easy assignment here. I want you to talk about your experiences with these intellectual traits. If you've ever been challenged on one of these levels, like for example, you had to admit that something was wrong, even though it would benefit you. That's something that you could write about for this group for this assignment. As I mentioned earlier, if you would like to look into one of those historical figures whose pictures I put in this presentation and talk about why you think I use them as an example for each of these things, that would also be, I think a good exercise. And I am also going to ask you to respond to your classmates' posts, because I would like for this to be a discussion where we all sort of like have our heads in the same place, and hopefully get us in the right mentality to move forward with this semester.